It's my great pleasure to welcome the next panel onto the stage. We have a distinguished set of panelists sitting up here. Please come and join us on stage. And the next panel is going to be moderated by Mary Wisniewski, a Chicago fixture in the journalism side for the better part of 25 years, more recently affiliated with the Tribune, prior to that with Reuters and the Sun-Times. She also has a weekly hit on WBBM radio, which is not on the program, but I'm plugging it for her as they settle down. I'm equally anxious and eager to hear what this next panel is going to be reflecting on the topic of the day from their vantage positions leading various agencies in the region. Over to you, Mary.
Okay, thanks very much. Wanted to say that I love the title of this conference, Are We There Yet?, which is something that I hear all the time from the backseat of my car. And usually what I say is, no, we're not, but it's time to get ready. It's time to put your shoes on and brush the crumbs off the seat. And I think that that's what policymakers are doing right now. We're not quite there yet, despite that we do have some autonomous features in some vehicles, but what we're trying to do right now is to get ready and to be prepared for the future that's coming. We have quite a panel today, and we're going to have lots of questions. We'll start with the introductions and then go right into them. On our far stage left here, we have John Yonan, who's the superintendent of Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. Next to him, we have Leanne Redden, executive director of the Regional Transportation Authority. And then we have John Bazek, who's the program development engineer for the Illinois Department of Transportation. We have president of the CTA, Dorval Carter. And then right next to me here is Amy Lee, who is the senior manager of strategic planning for the Illinois Tollway. So all people who are deeply involved in how we get around and are thinking about this issue that's coming up. And we're going to start on the transit side. And because our panel is going to look at, what kind of concerns are there? So I wanted to go ahead and start with the transit side. Leanne and Dorval and John Yonan, is there a concern about the introduction of autonomous vehicles? Is there a concern that there could be a displacement of transit because of these vehicles? And Dorval, do you want to start?
Okay. Yes, there's a concern. I think it is a concern that's not unlike the concerns that we've had about ride-hailing companies and scooters and car sharing and the other things, the other technologies that are now starting to impact mobility in the city as a whole. I think the point that I keep making, and I think the point that we really stress as a broader policy conversation, is that no matter how you deal with all the other mobility options that come into the city, you're still going to have to deal with the broader process of how do you actually efficiently move people through a dense urban population like the city of Chicago. And public transit, because of our capacity, if nothing else, will be a part of that conversation. I like to use an anecdote that people have heard me say, that if you took all the people in Willis Towers and you put them all into automated vehicles and had them all take automated vehicles to work, it would take 7 hours for them all to get to the building. That gives you a sense of sort of the magnitude of the problem that we're talking about and the reason why public transportation still needs to be a part of that conversation.
Hey, thank you. Leanne, wanted to ask you about that, but also how you see autonomous vehicles possibly working as part of a total solution that includes transit.
So I think CAVs present, I think, both challenges and opportunities. I think that it's also not, when I look at it from a regional transit perspective, it's not one size fits all. I think there's a real risk of disruption and challenges in the downtown urban core. Erin mentioned sort of this, platooned, empty vehicles sort of patrolling streets and just clogging the streets further. And nothing, as Dorval said, gets that throughput that public transportation can get. And so I think public transportation needs to be recognized as the backbone, whereby this whole extra collection of mobility options around the region get to exist with. Because if we sort of turn off the transit thing or ignore the transit piece and turn our backs on sort of the billions of dollars of investment. You know, we've sort of shot ourselves in the foot, if you will, because all the platooned and autonomous vehicles can't work. But in a suburban environment, Erin also mentioned sort of that last mile connection. I think the concept, and this is where some of the autonomous space is really being actively tested right now, in smaller, low density, lower capacity vehicles, providing connections and sort of circulation maybe to either more of a mainline feeder bus service, or train service for that matter. So I think that we shouldn't think about it as one size fits all. I think the key piece for us to think about, though, is to lean in on the policy conversations that we're shaping that future, that we are at the table. We're not saying that autonomous and connect, because we get to take the benefits of some of those technology advantages too. But we need to be part of that conversation. So from a equity, from a regulatory, and from just a basic organizational standpoint, that we're at the table thinking through those big challenges.
Okay, thank you. And John, could you talk a little bit about what the county is thinking about how this can be integrated with transit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I really appreciate the panel that's here. The diversity on the Cook County, has basically 1,600 lane miles of roadways. And so a few years back, President Preckwinkle, who's, the chairwoman of this UIC forum, really had looked at the entire transportation network when she became county board chair and said there needs to be a way that the road building industry embraces transit, that she truly believed in transit. And so when we came up with our long range transportation plan, we really saw a space for the road building industry to be able to play a role in transit. As Leanne said, as kind of the executive director of the regional transit administration authority, there is opportunities for there to integrate the different modes of transit, and that tends to be at times maybe right now a private sector opportunity that we talked about, the autonomous vehicles, but also a model that government should be at the table trying to fund. And so we have saw a couple opportunities. I know a couple questions came up earlier about where are we in that space. Cook County is working closely with Bedford Park. Bedford Park has an incredible industrial campus. It's vast, but it's also served by the CTA, by Metra, and by PACE. But to be able to use that transit and actually navigate through that industrial park truly became a challenge for some of the folks to have transit as a viable option. So a number of folks are actually driving to their jobs. And so in working closely with them, we helped fund a grant where they went out and surveyed some of the businesses and some of the people who work at those businesses as to if transit was an option for them, what was the challenges with it. And we really saw a space there where we could be able to, as again, the road building industry, be able to support a private entity to look at possibly CAV. Again, right now, some smart technology that they're actually developing out there. But that is an ongoing pilot that has been taking place the last couple of years in the village of Bedford Park.
Okay, thanks, John. To turn that around, we talked about the possible fears about AVs, but I also wanted to talk about what are some ways that it can reduce congestion in the future? And I wanted to ask our road people here, Amy and John Basic and John Yonan again, talk about what kinds of conversations are you having about how this might help cure some congestion on your roads?
Yeah, I'll jump right in. So, when we, at the Tollway, when we think about CAV technologies and their development, we sort of see that as part of a ongoing spectrum of adopting technology into our operations when it makes sense, when it presents safety solutions for us. We have a test bed on I-90 called Smart Road, and we see that as a technology that's here today that allows us to really maximize the use of the pavement that we have out there, right? So we have a wide inside shoulder that allows pace to get by congestion. We also use that too to create workarounds if we have an incident on our roadway or on our main line. So CAV Technologies presents sort of that next generation solution. If we don't have to continue investing in these gantries that go over our road, and a future smart vehicle has a panel inside of it that tells the vehicle which lane to get into, that presents sort of the next generation on being able to alleviate the congestion around those.
Have you talked about the idea of having separate lanes for AVs, or is there? Or is
Yeah,
that,
that's, you know, honestly, that's part of a broader policy discussion I think that we need to have as a region. I think the tollway is open to those ideas, and if we believe that that's something that we should be moving towards, given new policies, that's definitely something we want to be open to.
okay, thank you, John. John Basic, can you talk about what is IDOT doing as far as incorporating this technology, or just talking about how this technology is going to work with your roads?
Yeah, as far as IDOT, we have, with the previous administration, welcomed autonomous vehicles to Illinois, and so we are fairly early in that process. But we are looking to partner and have partnered with industry to develop start thinking about developing pilot programs within the state of Illinois to allow the expansion and more studying of autonomous vehicle technologies. There's a couple of through Autonomous Illinois. There's some partnerships that have been developed, I think, with some testing in Itasca, as well as some stuff in Northeast Illinois. And I think one of the things that we can really kind of take advantage of, and has been talked about quite a bit, is the freight component, because certainly Illinois is the center of the crossroads of the United States from a freight perspective, from a transportation perspective, and with the amount of inland ports and freight intermodal facilities that there's potentially some real opportunities there to work with autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, for moving goods within those facilities, which could potentially be a launching pad for a lot more discussion and expansion of freight movement even outside the confines of those intermodal facilities. So I think that the policy discussions, though, are something that we are wanting to be part of and are getting our feet wet in that arena. We want to work with CMAP, who has some great insights on some of the challenges and the pitfalls of autonomous vehicles, because at the end of the day, we need to figure out a way with industry driving that development of autonomous and connected vehicles. What is the platform going to look like? IDOT, as an implementer, is always faced with challenges regarding trying to implement something that is the current technology today, but it takes a while to get to that point, and by the time sometimes we want to implement something, it's already past technology. So we want to find that connection with the industry and our partners to develop things that are going to be lasting and compatible with multiple modes or multiple strategies and technologies, and be able to evolve with that. So we're really looking forward to be part of that process and make sure that we can integrate that stuff. And right now is actually an amazing time for the department, because with the increase in the gas tax, we may be able to address a lot of our basic condition stuff is what we've been trying to wrap our arms around. But now with sustainable revenue sources, this maybe puts us in a better position to start looking a little bit more forward in integrating technologies in some of the infrastructure improvements that we're going to make.
Hey, thanks, John. John, you talked a little bit about this with the Bedford Park project, but what are some ways that Cook County sees as how this technology can alleviate congestion on your roads? And is this something that you're investing in as far as technology in the roads?
We are. Actually, I know Lake County wasn't asked to be a part of it, but they've got their passage system, and one of the gentlemen who operate the system and I were just chatting in the back. And so there's models, and where we are right now is when you actually come up to a traffic signal, look at the box. Look whose sticker's on there, because there's 4 jurisdictions of people who are responsible for those intersections, and you can't even freely flow down certain routes if you're not on a state route system, which tends to, and as you said, John, you guys have come a long way, but we're still telling traffic how to go and when to start and stop. But with the technology basically having that free flow ability, we no longer need to have it about jurisdictional responsibilities. If my road needs to travel faster than a municipal road or a county or a state road. So that type of discussions have been a real, I think, important kind of start to having government work together. And I think, again, John will tell you that, we're all pushing for the Eisenhower Expressway to be reconstructed. North Avenue, Cermak, Roosevelt, these are corridors that are being looked at where some of this technology under John's leadership has been discussed with some of the local agencies where we've got to figure this out. And we welcome, again, the private sector to be able to look at how when that expressway is under construction, those corridors, regardless of whose jurisdiction is, are going to be able to flow some of that traffic efficiently. So we've got a few models, but some real low-hanging fruit that we think we can just jump in as Cook County and in that case, partner with DuPage County and be the lead on making sure that reconstruction will have minimal impact on some of the locals.
Hey, I'm glad that the gas tax came up, because one of the things that's talked about a lot with autonomous technology is that it's not going to take gas. Yeah. It's going to be electric. And I wanted to ask Leanne about do you have some concerns or some ideas about how the user fee structure is going to change, and how is that going to affect funding for transit or for other things in the region when AVs become more common?
I don't think we have any concern in the very immediate future. The state capital program that just passed, it's got a 5-year bond component. We think we'll be good for the next 5 years.
Okay.
We've got a lot to do and a lot of things to spend those dollars on. But it is going to change over time. I think there's been a lot of conversation about vehicle miles traveled as a different pricing structure. And I think nationally we know that that's probably the direction that revenue generation is going to have to go. We do it on the tollway essentially already. We pay tolls based on how far we travel and where we go. So these aren't new concepts. We have to do a better job selling and explaining kind of what it is. But I think the other opportunity that I see with in this sort of pricing and funding conversation is the opportunity to keep the conversation going about congestion pricing, some of these other tools that could be used to do two things. One, potentially generate some revenue, but two, also manage behavior and ultimately congestion. And I think it keeps those conversations kind of fit into this broader conversation about sort of the technology and the implementation of some of these connected autonomous vehicles.
Okay, connecting with that, thank you. Amy, do you see a possibility in the future of, right now, trucks are, of course, the heaviest payers on the tollway. Do you see any kind of future where autonomous trucks would be a less heavy payer because they pose less of a threat?
Oh, I don't, well, they still carry heavy weights,
okay.
Right? And so they still put a lot of impact on our pavement. So I don't know that that's necessarily going to change the pay structure. We often look at how do we, what is the life cycle of our pavement and things like that. And so weights of the trucks will continue to be the weights of the trucks.
Do you see AV technology as changing your pricing structure at all?
I see that it could present some very broad opportunities to talk about policy in a new way, just sort of along the lines of congestion pricing and things like that. But I think that the tollway sits as an implementation agency. We don't set policy for these sorts of things. So when we look at the technologies that we employ, we certainly want to adopt technology that won't go obsolete, that will be flexible to sort of accommodate changes in policy. But I don't see that change coming from within the tollway.
Okay, thank you. And moving back to public transit, one of the things that is possible from AV technology is not only putting maybe more of these cars on the highway, but maybe affecting the way transit is operated. Do you see AV technology being used in any of your trains or in any of the short-run buses?
Yeah, I do think that there are possibilities for AV to eventually move into the public transit space. I think that the technology itself hasn't evolved to the point yet where I think that would be a practical conversation. The question that it will also raise will be what size vehicles should we be applying it to? I mean, currently we operate 40-foot buses. There are demonstrations in other parts of the world where they are using AVs for public transportation in a much smaller vehicle than what we currently use. I think that, how the public will react to AV technology for public transportation is a big part of that conversation. But, to some degree, if you look at our people mover at the airports and things of that nature, we're already sort of familiar with that concept in very short, periods or places of usage. Why that couldn't ultimately expand itself to much broader application, I think, is an interesting discussion. I think that the real question from my perspective will sort of be what will be the interaction with the customers with that kind of technology, and how would we still provide the customers with the support that they need to utilize our service with that kind of technology. I think there are a lot of people who would be more a little bit concerned about being on a crowded train and not having a CTA employee on there if something were to happen that created an issue. So I think we still have to work through those types of issues, but I think it's definitely a part of what the future holds in public transportation, and it will play a role in sort of what we do and how we sort of develop our policies as we go forward, both in terms of labor, but also in terms of the equipment that we use.
I wanted to, following up on that, could it free up some labor who are currently, driving to do things like customer service?
That's an interesting conversation. A lot of people ask me, well, does this mean that, people will lose jobs? My closest parallel to that, in terms of the experience within CTA, was when we went from taking cash and tokens to a cashless fare media system. We used to have these people called ticket agents who would sit in their booth all day and who would collect cash and give you a token that would allow you to ride on CTA. Those people today are called customer service agents. And what happened was really a transfer of the type of work that we had them do, not necessarily the elimination of their jobs. And I think, in my mind, that's what would happen with automated vehicles. I could still see the need for a person to be involved in that vehicle, but that role may change dramatically from driving the bus to fare collection and enforcement to dealing with unanticipated emergencies that occur on the vehicle and things of that nature, a much more customer-friendly, customer-focused approach than the traditional operating the vehicle approach.
Okay, Leanne, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, and just to take a step, I think, back from sort of getting to this fully autonomous vehicle state, I think that there's lots of opportunity, though, that this technology, the elements of this technology can present in the transit space, as they are already providing to all of us with our, my car has the backup thing. It freaks out if I change lanes too fast. But those technologies can help even in the public transport space in terms of improving safety and efficiencies even in the operations. I think that there's the smarter the vehicles become too, it can help on the maintenance side, so you can get more operating efficiencies out of the actual operations of the vehicle and your fleet, extend the life of the fleet. So I think, sometimes when we have these conversations, we a lot of times jump to sort of, stage 5 or
Right,
level 5, whatever they refer to it as.
Suddenly 20 years ahead.
Right.
But the components along the way, I think, are also as advantageous to us in the transit space to help us create safety and efficiencies as well. And I think that shouldn't be lost sight of. I think that some of that technology exists and is already presenting some benefits for us.
And I agree with that. In fact, we are already starting to integrate that kind of technology into our buses and trains even as we speak. So there will be benefits that we'll get from the technology as it develops that will start, what you see in your cars today, you'll start to see appearing in my buses in the future that will allow us to operate them more safely and more efficiently.
Okay, thank you. We don't have anyone from Metra on the panel, but this is something that, they're already incorporating positive train control, which is, they still require the engineer on the train, but this is an extra bit of safety in case a problem happens with the engineer. And so it's already happening here on the Metra system and on the freight system. John Basic, I wanted to ask you about funding changes in the roads to make them safe for autonomous vehicles or make them safer for even partially autonomous vehicles. One of the things that I keep hearing as a subject of conversation is, well, what if the lines aren't painted white enough? Or what if the curbs aren't high enough? What kind of conversations are you having at IDOT about that?
Yeah, we are certainly hearing more and more about what the industry is demanding, really, to be able to make those technologies most effective. We are hearing things about wider pavement marking lines, having actually equipment, electronic equipment in traffic signals to be able to make them be able to talk to the vehicles, a vehicle to object, or so that when those vehicles are approaching those intersections, and like there was a description or a discussion in the previous panel talking about the two vehicles coming at an intersection and being able to talk to all of them through an intersection. So what does that look like? We're still learning about what those technologies could be for those connected to components. But as far as like roadway safety, making sure that as we rebuild, for example, I-80, that's been a lot of discussion, I-290, making sure that those roadways are provided with wide lanes or wider lanes to be able to make sure that they're well delineated, making sure that things like having fiber optics throughout the entire network, which sounds like such a simple thing, but there are still gaps. There are still areas that don't have that fiber, which could be then used as a conduit to provide that connectivity and connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle technology to be able to communicate with other vehicles and other things within the infrastructure. So we are continuing to learn about that, and given that we're going to be having more money to be able to more sustainable maintain, rebuild a lot of our system, but maintain it more in a more frequent and meaningful fashion. So we also, as part of our maintenance program last year, we implemented a transportation and asset management plan, a TAMP plan, which then will allow us to do more improvements to our roadways, make them more smooth, more safe, more frequently. So doing more frequent maintenance, which would then, by having that system in place, that'll allow us to provide those better pavement markings, better lane delineations and delineators to make sure that they are in good working order to allow those connected vehicles, those autonomous vehicles to be able to work in an environment that is at an optimum condition.
Thank you. And following up on that, how about the differences between rural and urban and suburban driving? Are you going to have enough money to put all those changes into place in country roads in southern Illinois the same way you are going to be able to do up in I-80 by Joliet?
No. I think there is an opportunity there, though. Aaron brought it up. I think it's been talked about, in the previous panel. Cities may have, a different, set of technologies or whatever, different players may be involved in the more urban areas. So whatever that technology is here may not need to be the same as it is out in a more rural area. So it may be less intense. So maybe that is something that the state can, with fiber connections and things like that, provide those rural areas with some technology component that can provide some level of connection and I guess, ability for those autonomous vehicles to work in that environment that is similar because but yet different to the urban, because the urban area has just so much more inputs and there's so much more going on that in a rural area you wouldn't see that. So it could provide the same level, but it's contextually different. So I think we are going to work with the communities, the cities. And cities like Joliet may be one of those areas, but in between, what does it look like in between there? That's where we can kind of fill those gaps.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, so, I know that just again, sitting through the panel previously, you had the private sector saying government better get their act together. And what we don't want to come across is as if we have really, the answers to the questions that we've got to be able to, obviously most important, as John said, it's all about the safety. Privacy is a big deal. We heard the gentleman talk about the fact that perhaps allowing a permitted pole to go up, a wireless 5G pole, is now perhaps causing some radiation challenges. It's all back on government. But all that being said, I think the point that what we want to say is we're very open to really embracing the private sector, looking for a non-for-profit like CMAP to convey us together. And we've been doing this, as John said earlier, for about a couple years now, where even with the transit agencies, sitting down saying, we want to engage the private sector to try to understand what is it. We talked about pavement marking, but there's 20 different types of pavement markings out there. Is it got to be a certain type? Well, we don't have those answers. And yesterday I was speaking to the folks, at the dinner that we might even get beyond pavement mark. We don't care about your pavement mark. We don't care if you got curb and gutter, rural cross section. These are all things that government will take years to catch up, and technology will pass us by. So truth be told, I think that's the thing we can say, Tollway, IDOT, is we were engaging the community. We have to understand the private sector's role and responsibility. You got to understand government's liability part of this too. And somehow we really do believe we've got to get this right. And we are engaging in those conversations for a couple years now.
Okay, thank you. I actually wanted to ask everyone on the panel this related question. What have you heard from the private sector as far as what would they like to do? What would they like to see? Start off from the tollway. What is the private sector telling you they'd like to see to make ready for autonomous vehicles? Amy?
Yeah, they certainly want to be able to start using our infrastructure for piloting opportunities, and I think John brought that up, and I think that it's important, it behooves us to be able to engage in those conversations in a way that ensures public safety first and foremost, but two, to be able to begin to have these incremental discussions with them about, again, what are they looking for? What sort of cooperation are they needing from public agencies like the Tollway, so that they can start incrementally learning what their own capabilities are, and also informing us too of what those capabilities are. I think that's the challenge with CAV technologies, that innovation is really being pushed from the private sector side, and for obvious reasons, there's a race to get their products out to market. We don't really know how quickly these things are going to come to market and what their capabilities are. So we know that they would like to start piloting these things. We'd like to engage in those conversations and really learn more about where they're going with these things.
Are you telling them, what are you telling them? No, not now, but let's keep talking?
Let's have a dialogue.
Okay.
Let's see what it is you want to do.
Okay, thank you. Dorval, what has the CTA heard from the private sector as far as this technology?
I would agree with what Amy was saying. Is that what I'm hearing is, technology is moving much faster, innovation is happening much faster than the public sector is used to interacting with it. And so what they're looking for are ways to engage us. We are burdened with procurement procedures and other things that are very much set up in a traditional way of the public agency knowing what it wants, going out and asking for it, and then seeing who responds to it. Well, technology and the way innovation is happening right now, in many instances, we don't know what we don't know. And so one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about is there a way for us to bring ideas and concepts to you, to work with you, to develop them, to sort of have an opportunity to pilot and to try things? And how do I work through the bureaucracy that exists around a public agency to even find out who to talk to around those issues? One of the reasons why I recently created a new position at CTA called the Chief Innovation Officer was to create an ombudsman within CTA who could actually help companies sort of navigate CTA to understand where to work with us to develop technology, and also to make a broader point to the technology world and innovators in this world that CTA is open for business. I recognize that if I want to be relevant 20 years from now, I have to be prepared to innovate and to really think outside the box, to really reimagine what public transportation is going to look like in the future. But I'm not going to do that on my own. I really need the private sector, who is spending much more time and energy, thinking about this than I am, because I'm trying to run a bus and train system every day, to come to us with these ideas so that we can figure out ways to incorporate them into what we do, so that we are able to provide the type of reliability, the improvement in quality, the efficiencies that the public expects of our public transit system as we continue to grow and evolve.
Okay, thank you. John, what are, with the private sector, you've been working with them? I know that there's a test track going on in Rantoul.
Yeah, I don't know where that is, in the development process. I think it's basically it's a partnership with the University of Illinois, some private sector partners. That's very early in the process, but it's something that we're working towards happening. And it may take a while. Government is a little slow sometimes to react and to kind of get things kind of worked out, but it will happen, and we will be having those discussions and those piloting opportunities. Something that I was thinking about while Amy was talking about with industry. There's a significant push right now, and it's affecting all communities. The city of Chicago, rural, urban, is the 5G development and implementation, making sure that there's 5G micro towers on all sorts of infrastructure, blanketing communities and things like that. So I think that the 5G technology is going to be presumably a fundamental component of that connected autonomous vehicle and other connected, everything discussion. So that's probably, that's going to be something that we're, very involved with and are right now very involved with. There has been some discussion, and it was actually touched on in another question about would autonomous vehicles benefit from having dedicated lanes and things like that. And I think there has been some, modest discussion about, having expressways that might have like a managed lane component. People have talked about the Kennedy. It's got these reversibles. Are things like reversible lanes or having managed lanes, are those potential opportunities to provide a platform for autonomous vehicles to be able to utilize in a mixed use environment? And we've talked about the lane pavement markings. John mentioned it. It's like, that is something that seems to be important now, but then other entities perhaps think it to be less important as more technology goes and is developed. But I think another thing that some of the industry, private sector would be interested in is the information. What information we have, whether it's our traffic signal, the way they operate, and how they're synchronized with other signals, and our traffic data collection. I think they would have some interest in some of that. But how to share that information in a way, and what the standards are, and the protocol for that has yet to be developed, and do they really even need it? I mean, at the end of the day, will they have essentially more information than what we can even provide because of connected vehicles, personal cell phones, and all those other things? So, but we're willing and bottom line, we're willing and wanting to work with them as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Leanne, what have you heard from the private sector? Do they want information, or do they want to propose a scheme?
I think we're hearing everything that everyone's sort of already reiterated, so I won't belabor that. I guess my sort of takeaway from that is, though, it's sort of, or a translation of that is, it's not an us versus them or a them versus us. I think we are coming, the public and the private sector come at this very differently. It's sort of a clash of cultures maybe, and I think sometimes we're talking past each other. But I think what we have to do is continue a dialogue and an understanding of what we're all trying to accomplish. I think that, we have, in the public side, have very separate and distinct goals and outcomes that we need. I mean, we're here to protect the public interest, to protect equity, safety first and foremost. We're not here to make a dollar. But we, on the public side, have to understand sort of the role and the motivation of the private guys and the innovation and what they can bring to the table for us. And so we have to sort of find, I think, through continued conversation, a way to bring us together so we're not sort of talking past each other, that we can reach some of these mutual understandings and sort of advance a set of collective goals. And I think a lot of that has to get driven by the policy conversations that we have to continue to have. I know the private guys, especially in the technology space, kind of think that's laborious and slow, but I don't think we should just give up on sort of the place that we all have built and exist in, the cities, the suburbs, the communities and towns that we've built, and just sort of throw our hands up and say, just let it, complete disruption take over. I think we have to be mindful about, are we creating the kinds of places that people want to live, work, and play in?
Okay, thank you. Lan, I wanted to follow up by asking about a project that I've written about with the RTA about Bannockburn, where you had a combination of the private sector with Lyft and the public sector with Metra as finding a way to get people where they're going.
Yeah, we've done some pilots. That's more in sort of the ride-hailing services space, but partnering in the suburban environment, some of the less dense areas, to provide connectivity from an end of a metro line on a reverse commute, connecting into some of the suburban campuses. And we've got a couple of pilots actually running and hoping to expand that further. Again, to kind of just monitor, learn, see how they evolve. And could they, as the technologies come online, could autonomous vehicles play in that space as well? And I think some of the tests that we've seen around the country, in some of those less dense campus environments, lend themselves well to earlier stages of autonomous and connected vehicles. So I think that there's, again, opportunities for us as well as sort of some challenges that I think we need to think through.
Okay, thank you. And John, what has the county heard from the?
Yeah.
from the private sector?
That really, the rules of the road, it's the state that dictates that. And on the policy side, they're just asking for counties, municipalities, transit service boards. Are we all working together on creating a policy that's consistent? What they don't want is having to deal with municipal challenges with legislation that they'll decide to pass, then counties, ordinances, then other state laws, and all of that just making it impossible for them. So they've just asked if we would just all collaborate. And I know, again, the question earlier about CMAP and the role that they can play and the opportunities that we really have with, Erin Alleman, who, when she was over at the state, was one of the leaders in that autonomous space that was convening this region's units of government, DOTs, and transit. And so with her role now over at CMAP, we really believe that we are working close together. And under her leadership, I think we really can kind of give exactly what that private sector is looking to do, is just to have policy that really does deal with state, local, municipal type of ordinances and regulations. So that's what they constantly ask, is when they see us and it's like, have you talked to the state? What about your municipalities? Are you all together? And at least I think I can with a good conscience say we really are collaborating in the space, and all of us here, we've seen each other in different venues that have said the same thing about how policy needs to be crafted. So I think we're answering that question the right way, and that's kind of what they've been asking.
Well, since we're in a university, and there's lots of university types here, I wanted to ask because this is this is a futuristic discussion. What sorts of things, what kind of support would you like to see from universities to help you learn about how to handle this new technology? And this is a question I'm throwing open to anyone.
Well, let me speak to that, because I think there's the benefit of a city like Chicago is that we have a very rich higher learning education core that sits in the city, and to be able to tap into that core to help bring new ideas that focus on new technology and new ways that we can integrate public transit using new technology, I think is a tremendous opportunity for us. And I know that there are projects that UIC is working on where they're basically collaborating with agencies like mine and saying, we're going to turn our students loose on you. And I say that in a very positive way. And say, tell us what your problems are and let us help you figure out how we can support you. And when I talk about thinking outside the box and really viewing what we do from a different lens, I think that's what universities teach their students to do. It's part of the education process. And so we have a tremendous resource in Chicago that allows us to use that. And I think the issue is, how do we basically tap into that resource in a way that can bring ideas to us and can allow us to develop those ideas in ways that support what we try to do every day.
Okay, so you hear that? He's open.
I'm open.
Okay. Anyone else on the university role?
Well, from an Illinois DOT side, we've certainly partnered and have, historically partnered with University of Illinois, Chicago, as well as Champaign, and I think that that's going to be a continual partnership. But this opens up a whole new opportunity to do it a lot more aggressively, and it's not just a partner with the university, but we somehow need to also bring in the private sector, because they're going to be providing the latest and greatest, strategies, the approaches, and having the ability of having students provide input and help develop that, bridging that gap between the technology and where maybe boots on the ground kind of stuff. I think is going to be very, very critical for our success, and that could help develop and start the development and the conversation of those policies that need to be in place for all this to work going forward.
Okay, thank you. Any Star Trek fans here in this panel? Okay. I wanted to go on a vision
Okay,
quest.
where are you going with this question?
Well, now 20 years ago, we were using tokens at the CTA. We were doing things a lot differently. We weren't seeing scooters all over the place. We were seeing a lot of things that are different, and we were seeing a lot of the things that are the same. I'm wondering if everyone in the panel can just kind of imagine, what do you think the roads and the systems of the Chicago area are going to look like in 20 years with autonomous vehicles? And I'm going to start over here with Amy. What do you think this is going to look like?
20 years,
Yeah.
that's technology will absolutely be completely different, but I don't see our region really changing that much land use wise. And so I do think that people will still be coming from a lot of the same places that they'll be. So I think it's more about how they navigate the tollway system and hopefully start thinking more intermodally as they navigate the overall transportation system.
Okay, thank you. Which next generation?
All of them.
All of them, yeah.
What I think you're going to see is better integration. Technology is going to allow the seamless integration between various modes of transportation, for which public transportation will be the backbone, but where you'll be able to get into a car. The car will take you to a CTA station. But not only will it take you there, it'll basically coordinate your ride in a way that when you arrive there, the train will be pulling to the station. The train will know to wait because there's a car arriving that the person's going to be getting on to take that train to go to a different location where they will take an Uber or a Lyft or something like that to complete their destination. What I think you're going to see is that these various modes will start to integrate into a mobility ecosphere that's going to allow the people who live in this city to have the seamless ability to move between one mode of transportation to another in a way that provides the most convenient and most efficient method of travel for what they're trying to do. Right now, we're all operating sort of independent of each other, and we rely on the person to figure out how to integrate us. When we're at a point where the person basically doesn't have to worry about that, it's all taken care of for them, I think that's when you really have reached another level of mobility that will tie in automated vehicles, it'll tie in ride hailing, it'll tie in scooters and everything else in a way that allows us to make it as easy as possible for people to get around the city.
Okay, and not a dystopian future. That sounds nice. Okay, John, what do you think? What's it going to look
Not
like?
teleporting, but
Yeah, well, the first thing, the transportation system will be dramatically safer. I mean, we will, right now we've got a drive to zero fatalities, and, that seems like it's real. I mean, it's a possibility. I could see urban areas like the city of Chicago, there might be a day or time where there might still be, and there likely will be, vehicles, like personal cars. People will still have their classic cars, but they might have to go out to the country to drive. If you're going to come in towards the city, maybe you drive to a certain point and maybe jump into an autonomous vehicle at the fringe of a city, and maybe the city itself is primarily public transit, autonomous vehicles, because with the mix of the mode, the vast variety of modes, having autonomous vehicles in the city is probably that's maybe the only way all of that can work together. So there's that possibility. So yeah, I think that's, but and also actually, and in between that, the safety doesn't necessarily just benefit the city. It benefits even in the suburbs, because even where there are people driving their own cars, having a dense mix of autonomous vehicles is going to likely result in increased safety of the roadways as well, harmonizing speeds and things like that. So. Yeah, I do believe it's coming in 20 years. It'll be very, very different, as Amy alluded. Yeah, the technology will be it's unimaginable in my.
Okay, so another positive view. Leanne, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not going dystopian either. I'm going positive. And I agree with everything that's been said already. I guess an additional point that I would highlight is I think this interconnectivity and this access to information, and I think this is an underpinning of all of that, is this sort of shared economy that we're already kind of living in some respects, but as Dorval said, it's sort of still a little bit disconnected. As it becomes even more connected, both I think as much, not just connected vehicles, but just information connectivity, I sort of see this real opportunity for sort of people just choosing to go somewhere and less ownership of individual vehicles. I won't need to have a car to get to the train station. I'll just hit something on my phone or whatever device I have. Maybe it's just embedded into my brain at that point. But and the vehicle will show up, or it will actually predict that this is probably the time. I mean, Google's already playing with some of this stuff, predicting that you've seen on your own phone. It gets in and it thinks it's like, okay, drive time to work, which annoys me because I always take transit. But it tells me what it would take me to drive to work every day, because it knows it's about the time that I'm now moving, so I'm probably going to work. So you take that to the next level, and I think that there's some real opportunities, though, so people will get away from the individual, privately owned vehicle, more of a shared economy, and I think that's even a bigger boost for a broader public transportation network. It really has to underpin all of that. But it's all about the choices.
I think that's a really important point, because we're not just talking about autonomous vehicles as being a technology on their own. There's all this other technology that's happening at the same time, changes in the way we work, the way we go to work, changes in the way we organize our time, and all the different tools that are helping us or making things worse for organizing our time. Leanne, I wanted to follow up because your agency handles the budgets for PACE, which handles the ADA transportation. I wondered if you could address how you think that AV would incorporate and may possibly improve transportation for the disabled.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that there's a huge opportunity for smart vehicles, autonomous vehicles in sort of the ADA space, but even just more importantly, I mean, younger people who can't drive a car now. Like, I don't know, I kind of keep babysitters around just to get my kids to and from after school activities sometimes, to be able to put them in a car that gets them there safely would be, or a vehicle that gets them there safely would be great. But elderly, I mean, my parents are getting to that age where, my mother's eyesight, her ability to drive is going to go away. So being still connected to community and things she wants to do, I think, these are beyond even just the, strict limits of ADA. I think the opportunities really are very exciting, I think, for everybody as a community, and our ability to sort of continue to function and move around the spaces, as Amy said, to sort of get to where you want to go to work, live, and play.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, so I think your question, tying that into the earlier question about academia. So in January, UIC hosts the Future Cities competition that brings out, the smartest of the smartest grade school kids that get a chance to design a city of the future. And as one of the judges for the last 7 years, to come out and ask the question, when you see their little displays, and it's in this room that they put those out there, and you see that very few of them really design roads anymore. And what's great is when you ask some of these students, where are the roads in your system? And unfortunately, a lot of times I judge the design of the roadway, and they're like, sir, there's no roads in my future city. And so that's where I really believe and agree with everything that was said, is that even though we just passed the capital bill, there still isn't enough money to rebuild the built infrastructure in and around the Chicagoland area, Cook County. So there is going to be less roads, and the need to really drive for that type of real equitable, getting around, connecting with people, connecting with one another in the places we work, play, and that's what I think that these kids got it right. There's going to be less roads in the future.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering to thank you so much for everything all these thoughtful comments. And I wondered if I could open it up for questions. Does anyone have any questions for this distinguished panel? I don't know where the mic person is, but. Oh, here comes the mic. So wait, everyone wants to hear your question. So thank you.
Yeah, actually, I mean, we are at a critical point in the transportation history, and the public policies we implement now are going to be critical for this generation as well as the future generation. And I know you are talking about partnership with private industries, and I mean, their goal is to maximize their profits. And the government goal should be to maximize the benefits of the current generation as well as the future generation. And I'm saying this because, you know, private industries will influence the policies through their lobbying and other things. If you look at the last century, for example, a lot of automakers, apparently people say influenced, so that the public transportation is inhibited. And that's why we have all these sprawling suburbs and so many cars driving. So how can we prevent and make sure that it is the public good of this current generation as well as the future generation that is taken into consideration, that is the main focus, not the profits of the private industry.
Okay, thank you. So the question, how can we protect the public in this, in this new age? Anyone?
Well, I think,
Thank you.
you know, Leanne, I think, mentioned this earlier about the role that public agencies play in this conversation. And you're absolutely right that we have a broader responsibility to society than just making money. You know, the equity issues, the access issues, the broader societal benefits that come from, at least in my case, public transit, are a part of what should be in the dialogue as the policymakers start to approach what are the policies that are going to support this type of innovation going forward. You know, one of the things that I found interesting, and it's, I think you've heard thematically this being mentioned by all the panelists here today, is there's a lot of money being spent on the technology side of this conversation. You know, rushing to get to level 5 AV and basically starting to figure out how we get there. There's not nearly the same amount of resources being spent on how municipalities, states, county government, and other agencies are going to basically integrate all this technology into our society. And that's something that we all need to be wary of, because this technology is coming, we all agree with that, and it's going to get here, and the real issue is, are we ready to integrate it into our cities and our states and our counties? And there's the same level of preparation needs to happen on that side of the house that's happening on the technology side of the house. And so the real issue for us is who's really leading that effort, where are the resources coming from to help us answer the questions that we're all talking about here about what exactly is this going to look like, and how do we make the trade-offs between equity, quality of life, efficiency, congestion, air quality, livability in general. There are trade-offs and compromises that have to happen around all of this, and who's going to figure that out, and how are we going to make it work in the city of the future? And I think we as the public agency have that responsibility, and then we have to figure out how we're going to integrate what the private sector wants to bring to us in a way that's still going to accomplish those other broader societal goals that we have viewed as critical to the way in which we operate and behave on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you. Over here? Oh, I'm sorry, go over here. Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, before you, go ahead.
It's okay. I appreciate the productive visionary discussion. You know, the question I have, though, is about, you said it's going to happen over the next 20 years, which is really not that long of a time. It's cost, and the financing of this cost. You know, when you things you've mentioned here, those numbers can run up pretty big. In Illinois, we do have a lot of debt, a lot of pension debt, and I'm wondering about the squeeze, how we're going to pay for this. Where's it going to come from? Who's going to pay? How much is it private? How much is it public? What are you going to do it? And are there cost estimates right now that you can share with us in some way that maybe talk about perhaps a phase or an example or an illustration doing the Eisenhower Expressway? I just want to hone in on this because in Illinois, we better start saving for it.
Okay, thank you. Amy, when you were putting the smart technology into I-90, how big a part of the cost of the building of that road was that?
Yeah, I actually don't have the number right off the top of my head, but I'd kind of like to pose the question back to you. What is it that you think that we're pricing out? What are the scope of improvements? I actually think that we, in this age of data sourcing, cloud sourcing, things like that, that we have an opportunity to offset the costs that we have in putting out devices, collecting all this information about congestion and speed and where incidences are happening on our roadways. We have an opportunity to offset that cost and maybe go to a Google and ask them, why don't you tell us that, instead of us investing in millions of dollars of putting those devices out there, maintaining them, and having to change them out every 10 years. So I think the door is still sort of wide open on that question. We don't know what it is that these technologies could present to us in terms of cost or benefit. But what I will say is we have begun a very low-budget, small-scale connected vehicle pilot along I-90. We've installed 8 different DSRC devices out on I-90 over about a 10-mile stretch. I think it's totaling us right now $100,000.
And I guess I'd just add to it, I don't necessarily think it's the public sector or the public agency's role to be that innovator. I think it's our role is to maybe incorporate some of these technologies as we're making other improvements once they've been recognized, tested, and sort of, and we can still get in the space of testing and piloting, but we shouldn't, because we're sort of much more in charge or charged with overseeing sort of this broader public good, if you will, to steal a true economics term, I don't think it's our responsibility to sort of be too cutting edge on this stuff and sort of, but incorporating things as we're making other improvements. Another point that a couple of us have touched on is set pensions aside, I don't want, that's too much of a political conversation, but just from a basic infrastructure standpoint, the need for investment across the existing infrastructure that we have, that even as it gets smarter and needs to be upgraded, you still have to have this core-based infrastructure, and that's billions and billions of dollars in of itself. And even with this unprecedented state capital program, I'll just speak from the transit standpoint, it doesn't get us, if we just get this capital program and in 5 years' time do nothing beyond that, it's just a blip on the radar and makes basically no difference to the state of the condition of our assets. And in a sense, we'd be sort of ignoring the billions that have already been invested into this infrastructure that we have. So we have to be kind of protective and mindful of that, incorporating, I think, some of this technology as we make improvements. You buy your phone dies, you don't just buy the flip phone, you upgrade it, it gets new enhancements, new features. And that's what we do in the public sector, but we're not really going to be driving some of that. So I don't think it's our job to price what that cost is going to be. I think that's somewhat the private sector bringing some of those resources to the table and pricing them appropriately, that we can start incorporating some of those so it's a cost benefit in terms of efficiencies and safety and things like that. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just piggyback on that. The reality is that the future roadways that we maybe rebuild just for condition, issues that may not require some of the stuff that we consider today smart. I mean, we know if putting gantries along the expressway today is probably the most progressive that we have as a technology for highways now, but in 5 or 10 years, with all the information that Google provides or all these, all the providers, they might not need gantries to be able to tell you up ahead that there's an incident. I actually know that now. If I use Waze or Google, it'll tell me there's something going on, get off the road and do something else. So, there is the potential that there is less investment in our infrastructure to some degree to make that happen. But but foundationally, we still need, at least for the next time being, some roads. Maybe in some future there won't be a need for roads, but there's still a lot of stuff. And there's bridges that are in bad shape. There's drainage that needs to be improved, and there's a lot of things that need to be upgraded along the way, regardless of the connected vehicle and technology component. So.
Well, it sounds like it's the approach like that CDOT takes now. We're going to redo this road, so while we're here, why don't we add a bike lane? Or while we're here, why don't we add some technology that's going to help with autonomous vehicles, or prepare for a technology that's coming, as well as improving the technology we have. So. And see if the public sector can pay for any of it, or private sector can pay for any of it along the way. Another question. Where's the mic lady? Right here?
Gotta stand up.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I wanted to just bring in another sort of public good aspect of thinking about this, which is public health, and in particular, people walking. So the kind of descriptions of the 20-year future, I have to say, scared me a little bit, because it seemed like the car is going to deliver you to the CTA, and then the CTA is going to take you somewhere. Another car is going to pick you up. But I think we know one of the big advantages of people taking public transit is that they actually are walking more. And I just want to make sure that gets into the conversation, and just how much can you think about that?
Well, we've got to go, the On to 2050 plan that Erin talked about before, and we all participate and actually sit at that table sort of talking about and planning that future. And walking is a huge component of that sort of the space, the physical space that and the livability of a space that we will engage in. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think we're just skipping over that just because of the purpose of this conversation was more
The question was more about what kind of future do I see around automated vehicles and connectivity, but especially someone like public transit, we definitely see walking as a big part of that process. And I think there's also another, broader societal issue around sort of what we're talking about, which is isolationism. There's a benefit to society that there are places that we gather together as a group and we interact as a group. And public transit is one of the ways in which that happens. The more you start to segregate that out, the more you have people in the individual cars and less interaction with others. I think there's a broader loss that occurs to our society as a whole as a result of that. That, while not necessarily a, quote, transportation issue, I think is part of the broader policy conversation that has to happen about sort of what do we want the future of our city to look like.
You have a good point. Someone else in the back there? Two people in the back? There you go.
Thanks. Mary, you brought up this point about how when CDOT redoes a road, they add in bike lanes and stuff like that. Now, IDOT controls many arterial streets in Chicago. I wonder if they're thinking about maybe partnering with the CTA, adding in bus lanes, bike lanes, maybe thinking a little more broadly about the purposes of the streets while they're rebuilding them for AVs.
Yeah. You want me to go
ahead. That's a little off the topic of AV, but that's okay. Let's get into it.
I mean, the reality is that we do coordinate, partner. We have stakeholder coordination meetings with including the city, CTA, PACE. We talk about, actually IDOT has a complete streets policy. It's kind of on the heels of the city's longer term complete streets policy. But yeah, biking, walking, are certainly foundational to all of our infrastructure planning as we're going forward. And we do and have implemented bike lanes and things like that. We're still kind of evolving, I guess, a little bit, and we're doing more of it, but we're still, we've got a lot more opportunities that we're going to continue to do that as we improve our roadways going forward. So yeah, we do that, and we are, it's an important component in our planning.
One area where that's happening right now, in terms of real time, is on North Lakeshore Drive, where there's a conversation that's happening about rebuilding the drive, but it's not just a conversation around rebuilding it for cars. There's discussion about buses, how they should be integrated into that rebuild, bike lanes, parkland, all of that is a part of that whole corridor conversation in which I think the IDOT has really taken the lead in sort of working through that conversation and sort of determining what ultimately is the best way to approach the travel needs of that part of the city along that corridor.
Okay, and then there was another question here. Thank you.
Hello. I'm interested in your public outreach strategy and trying to determine how to best address the tensions between complexity and simplicity. For a long time, a regional transportation model said that a truck was the equivalent of 2 cars, which impacts certainly aren't that. And trying to assure that the public is aware of the complexity of these technologies and how far out some of these technologies may be at the moment, and trying to allay their concerns about what their impacts are, as well as how to assure that their expectations are in line with what is likely to happen.
Okay, thank you. I think there are some concerns from the public about the impact of AVs and new technology. How, we've seen some, there's many tragedies every year from regular cars, but there's also been a few high-profile ones of autonomous cars. How do we talk to the public about that? We'll start, anyone? We have to be ready. How do you reassure them?
Well, I think it's just the continued conversation on, panels like this, education with the public at large, elected officials, the engagement that we collectively do with CMAP, talking about sort of the vision for the future and all the subsequent components of that. I think that is just an ongoing conversation to understand sort of what this is, what this isn't. You just talk to somebody on the street, they don't necessarily even think that elements of autonomous vehicles already exist.
Right.
And when you go, well, hang on, do you have that backup assist? And you go, oh yeah. They don't necessarily haven't connected that to this sort of robotic, fully automatic vehicle roaming the streets. But you talk to a 12-year-old and they sort of assume that just is the norm for the future. So, I think we've got to sort of speak to multiple audiences, multiple generations and understanding, and I think that's just, and policymakers, elected officials too, helping them understand what this all looks like.
Yeah, and we have to have an elevator pitch here that they are the future of safety. And because, again, we know there's some sensational, stories that are out there. Statistically, the accidents on the expressway system this morning's commute, 3-4 accidents per morning commute, another 2 or 3 are the average. This technology is going to make things safer.
Yeah. Okay, and on that positive note, I would like to thank all of our panelists, Amy Lee from the Tollway, Dorval Carter from the CTA, John Basic from IDOT, Leanne Redden from the RTA, and John Yonan from Cook County. Thanks for staying.
Thank you all. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the moderators, Jerry Quant and to Mary Wisniewski. Big round of applause for both of them, as well as for the keynote speakers and everyone else who participated either here or over there. Thank you all for being here, making time today for an engaged discussion. A lot of questions were asked. A lot of answers were provided. And as academics and researchers, we have the burden on us to take this forward and move the dialogue towards some kind of convergence as we move into the future. And this is not the end of the Urban Forum for this year. Before you get startled, there's going to be a second phase of this. If you look at your program, there are 4 authors who have written white papers for us on this particular topic area. They'll be coming back to the campus at a later point this semester, maybe during the month of November. And we'll keep you posted. If you're interested in the topic further, do let us know. We can engage you and keep you posted about their arrivals to the campus so you can take part in those discussions. And one of the things that we would like is there's this feedback form. Please do fill this out. As academics, we look at this data and see how we can improve ourselves. So do kind of humor us with that. And one of the other things that I wanted to do is to take this opportunity to thank a whole bunch of people who made this possible. When we first met back in January, I think, I was told that the deadline for the final program should be sometime in June or July. Of course, true to fashion, I pulled this along till the last minute, in fact, till yesterday afternoon. And they were nimble enough and fleet-footed, and they were able to accommodate to our whimsical ways of programming this event and made this a grand success. So Jenny Sweeney, Brian Flood, Ed Berry, Taylor, Carla, and Norma Ramos, and if I'm missing out on anyone, the Dean Pagano, for being the fearless leader. And so all of this came together at the right moment and made this a complete event, in my opinion. I hope you felt the same way. If you didn't, here's your chance. Let us know. And we'll try to improve on ourselves for next year. That's the whole game. And of course, there's lunch. I'm sure someone will point you or follow the smells and you'll get to lunch. Do let us know. And shameless plug for the Urban Transportation Center that I have the privilege of heading. We are in our 40th year. We'll be doing some event to commemorate that. If you're curious to know about that, or if you are curious to know about what we do, go to our website, follow us on Facebook, check with Ed Berry, who goes on this Twitter thing and tweets out. And so be engaged. Let us know how we can do more work that is resonating with you. And with that, I'll close this event, and then thank you all.